The year is 2047. You are a soldier in the Galactic Federation, humanity's last line of defense against the alien threat. Your mission, alongside thousands of other soldiers, was simple: defend Earth at all costs. But that was 30 years ago, and now your cryogenic chamber has just malfunctioned, waking you up alone, decades too early. What do? That's what these Russian soldiers found out recently when their cryostasis malfunctioned and they woke up to find Earth had been overrun by aliens. That, or some kind of weird fever dream. Well, let's just say the world was a little different from what they remembered. It was March 1997 when Captain Pavel and his fellow Russian Spetsnaz soldiers were ordered to report for duty on an unknown mission. They had been training for this assignment for months, preparing them both mentally and physically to deal with any situation that might come up. So when they boarded the space shuttle that would take them to their destination, they felt confident in their abilities. But when they got there, the mission parameters were revealed to them. The task given to them was unlike anything they could have imagined. Once they arrived at the space station, they were told the world as they knew it had ended. They had been summoned because the Earth's atmosphere was under attack from hostile aliens. As a result, they were tasked with defending their home planet. In order to do this, the soldiers were put into cryogenic stasis until a time when they would be needed. This meant that for the next 30 years, they would sleep while the aliens took over the world, slowly killing off the human population one by one. They wouldn't wake up until 2027, but that plan fell apart when the cryochamber's cooling system failed. Suddenly, they found themselves thrust into a present day that looked like a post-apocalyptic movie set. Their ship had landed in Siberia, but instead of finding a military base, they came across ruins. It seemed like the building had been abandoned for years. In fact, the entire city they found themselves in appeared to be deserted. As the captain walked around, he saw that the streets were full of garbage and debris, and that all the shops and buildings were destroyed. There wasn't even a single soul in sight. This made no sense to him because before going into cryostasis, the captain distinctly remembered seeing people in the streets. He also remembered seeing cars on the roads and birds flying overhead. Back then, the sky had been filled with the sounds of traffic and the laughter of children. It was a typical summer day in Russia. So where did everyone go? Did they really just abandon this place? The soldiers searched for signs of life, but they didn't find any. Everywhere they looked, they saw nothing but decay and destruction. It almost felt like the city had been bombed or something. But why? And where were the survivors? As they continued exploring the area, they came across a giant crater in the ground. It was clear that whatever had happened here had been catastrophic, but there was something else strange about it. The plants growing near the crater seemed to be completely unaffected by the destruction around them. In fact, they looked healthier than the ones they had seen in the surrounding areas. This led the captain to believe that the explosion hadn't happened on the surface of the Earth, but rather somewhere in the depths of the planet itself. Whatever had occurred here must have caused massive damage to the core of the Earth, causing it to destabilize and spew lava onto the surface. As the soldiers continued to explore, they began to see signs of a struggle between humans and aliens. There were burnt pieces of technology lying around, and in some places there were human bones. Some of the bones had strange symbols carved into them, which indicated that the people who died here were part of some kind of cult. These soldiers were starting to feel like they had stepped into a horror movie. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. They thought that after 30 years, the aliens would have taken over the planet and killed all humans. But here they were seeing evidence that humans had fought back. Then they found something that made their blood run cold. They found a diary written by one of the scientists working on the project. According to what they read, the alien invasion had begun in earnest sometime during the late 1990s. The first contact had been made in 1995, when a group of aliens known as the Visitors arrived on Earth. They were peaceful at first, but then they started demanding that humans give them resources in exchange for advanced technology. When the humans refused, the aliens attacked. A war broke out and lasted for several years. By the end of it, most of the human race was wiped out, but there were some survivors. They built bunkers and waited for the aliens to leave, but the aliens never did. They stayed on the planet and began draining its resources. They used advanced machinery to strip away the topsoil and extract precious metals from the ground. Meanwhile, the humans in the bunkers were slowly dying of starvation and thirst. By the time the soldiers read this, the only thing left of the human race was a small group of scientists and soldiers who were hiding out in the Siberian wilderness. According to the diary, the aliens had developed a device that allowed them to manipulate matter at a subatomic level. With it, they were able to turn water into solid ice and divert rivers away from human settlements. They also created machines that sucked the moisture out of the air, leaving the land even more barren and dry. In desperation, the humans in the bunker decided to fight back. They developed a weapon that emitted a sonic frequency which disrupted the aliens' ability to manipulate matter. It was a risky plan, but it worked. The aliens were driven away and the humans were able to take back some of the land. But this victory was short-lived. The aliens returned with even more advanced technology and wiped out the human resistance. Only a few survivors remained, including the author of the diary. It ended abruptly, leaving the soldiers with more questions than answers. Where were the aliens now? Had they left the planet? What happened to the rest of humanity? And most importantly, how could they survive in a world that had been devastated by war? With no answers, the soldiers decided to press on. They left the diary behind and headed deeper into the wasteland. They were hoping to find other survivors, but so far they had seen nothing but ruins. Days turned into weeks and the soldiers began to lose hope. They were running out of food and water and the sun was beating down on them mercilessly. Just when they thought they couldn't go on any longer, they saw something in the distance. It was a small cluster of buildings surrounded by a high wall. As they approached, they saw that the gate was open, and there were people on the other side. The soldiers hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. But their need for water and food was too great, and they eventually walked through the gate. What they saw inside the compound made their jaws drop. There were fields of crops, livestock, and even a small lake. It looked like paradise compared to the wasteland they had been traveling through, but this paradise was being guarded by armed men. The soldiers quickly realized that they had stumbled upon a secret settlement of human survivors. These people had managed to rebuild their lives and create a thriving community in the middle of the desert. However, they were wary of outsiders and the soldiers had to prove that they meant no harm before they were allowed in. Once they were finally admitted to the settlement, the soldiers were given food and water and allowed to rest. They spent several days there recovering before they were strong enough to continue their journey. During their stay, they learned that the settlement had been formed by a group of scientists and soldiers who had survived the initial alien attack. They had been living underground for years, but eventually the radiation levels became too high and they had to move to the surface. They built the settlement as a way to protect themselves from the elements and the animals that roamed the wasteland. The soldiers thanked the settlers for their hospitality and said their goodbyes. They knew that they had to keep moving if they wanted to find other survivors or maybe even find a way to defeat the aliens once and for all. But the soldiers had no idea what lay ahead. They had just woken up in a world that had been taken over by aliens. They had no idea where they were or how long they had been asleep. All they knew was that they had to keep moving forward. And so they did. They left the settlement and headed out into the wasteland, hoping to find other survivors or maybe even a way to defeat the aliens once and for all. What they didn't know was that they were being watched. The aliens had detected their presence and were curious to see what these strange creatures were doing on their planet. A group of aliens decided to follow the soldiers and see what they were up to. They were disguised as humans, so the soldiers didn't notice them. The aliens were fascinated by the soldiers and their technology. They had never seen anything like it before, and they were eager to learn more. They followed the soldiers for days, observing them from a distance. The soldiers, meanwhile, had no idea they were being watched. They eventually reached a large city and decided to settle down there. They fixed up some of the buildings and made it habitable. The soldiers were finally able to live a more normal life, but they were still wary of the aliens. They knew that they were out there and that they were watching them. One day, the aliens decided to reveal themselves to the soldiers. They came out of hiding and introduced themselves as the visitors. They told the soldiers that they had been observing them and they wanted to learn more about their culture. The soldiers were suspicious, but they eventually agreed to meet with the aliens. They talked for hours about their different cultures and ways of life. The soldiers learned that the aliens were not from this planet, but from a distant galaxy. They had come to Earth in search of resources, but they had not meant to harm the humans. The soldiers told the aliens about the war that had happened years ago, and how it had changed the planet. The aliens were shocked to hear this and apologized for what their ancestors had done. They offered to help the humans rebuild the planet, and the soldiers accepted. Together, humans and aliens worked to restore the Earth to its former glory. They planted trees, cleaned up the environment, and built new homes. It was a long process, but over time the planet began to heal. The soldiers finally felt like they were making progress. They had come so far and they were finally able to see a bright spot in the future. They knew that it would take time, but with the help of the aliens, they could rebuild the Earth and make it a better place for everyone.